Before we are talking about how it never makes sense why a monster like Ayanokoji was allowed to attend ANHS, we need to realize that a lot of systems and rules in ANHS actually don't make any sense if we think about it. For example, since the school turns a blind eye if a male student enters a female student's room at night, and since they also sell contraceptives, we could assume that ANHS somehow promotes relationships between opposite sex. They probably think a teenager's desire cannot be stopped, but they failed to think about what will happen to Class D students who don't have any points left, but cannot control their own desire. Since Class D students cannot even afford food, it's hard to think they could regularly buy a contraceptive, so it wouldn't be a surprise if there was a case where two students quietly disappeared from school due to pregnancy. However, that was just an expected outcome if you actually see their rules. Even for a dormitory system, ANHS is actually quite provocative when it comes to sexual matters. Starting from the length of their skirt, or how it is forbidden for a girl to not wear a skirt even in winter, they treated their female student with the utmost care for the sake of fan service. You can see how their clothes are so tight they perfectly show the shape of Ichinose's breast, or how Chabashira shows her beautiful cleavage for her students, so you should be able to draw a conclusion why they need to sell protection. Even if we ignore the inappropriate part, there are still at least 5 systems that don't make sense in ANHS. So, let's take a look at it one by one. The very first system that was explained to us is the class system that separates the students between 4 classes, where the gifted are placed in Class A, and the defective will be placed in Class D. While this concept might sound good for Ayanokoji's grade since readers love to see them climbing the ladder, this system actually cursed the Class D student to never reach Class A. Starting from the very first month, they will be faced with their low class point, and later faced with a midterm exam where a few students will get expelled. Not only were they robbed of class points and classmates, but it will also give them a lot of mental damage or even destroy their unity before it even starts. The dumb one will be doomed, and the smart one will most likely think of gathering 20 million and betraying their class. It was mentioned that there was a very rare or even never a case where Class D became Class C. And from what Nagumo said, it seems like the class battle is usually already over before they enter the 3rd year, so the most likely winners from the 4-class battle are either Class A or Class B. With that kind of system, it's just natural if Class D is only used as a sandbag or doormat, and left to suffer for 3 years of their school life. If they really have no chance to win, then why was this kind of system still maintained for almost 10 years? The hierarchy doesn't give them motivation, but just a depression because they know they have no chance to reach Class A. If even a student like Kiriyama got depressed because of a useless student like Kiryuin, just imagine how it feels to be the only capable person in the middle of Class D. Let's take Assassination Classroom as an example. In that manga, the school purposely discriminates against Class E to motivate the others, because if they get a low score in the exam, they will be put in a very uncomfortable environment. The other 4 classes work hard to not fall into Class E, and some Class E students also work hard to be able to get out from there. Their system is a perfect example of hierarchy and meritocracy, but ANHS doesn't give the same vibe. Since ANHS promote the students to work as a class, just one single individual will never rise in Class D if their classmates refuse to follow. Which mean the only one who have the chance to graduate as Class A are the class that was already full of high-quality students since the beginning, or the class that luckily has a strong leader. Needless to say, the dumb students who luckily placed in Class A will also have less motivation to work hard, because as long as they can avoid expulsion, the rest of the class will carry their ass. According to Chabashira, in her generation the 4 classes were almost equal to each other, and thus they fought until the end of the 3rd year. If the current system failed to give the same challenge, and only gave Class D students years of suffering, then it simply doesn't make sense why this 4-class system is still implemented. However, if we think about it, this might be the reason why Tsukishiro was allowed to change the system even though he was just an acting director, because they realized the system that Chairman Sakayanagi implemented was simply sucked to have. Have you ever wondered why the secret of the ANHS system could be maintained for so long? With more than 1,000 graduates, it's hard to think there was never a single soul who leaked the secret to the whole world, intentionally or unintentionally. It might have worked in the 20th century, but we now live in the era of the internet, where a secret could only be found on a dead body. Just thinking about it, The students who got accepted to ANHS should have tried to find everything they can before formally enrolling to school. And if they're searching the internet deep enough, they should have been able to find a rumor, or maybe even a secret group chat where the alumni spreading the information. Even though ANHS has some kind of contract that prevents the alumni from talking about their secret, it's near impossible to make sure everyone keeps their lips tight. Even if ANHS monitored the internet 24/7, it still wouldn't prevent the rumor from spreading from mouth to mouth. The freshmen could get information from their school alumni or maybe from a distant cousin, so it's kind of strange why Class D always ended up in the last position. However, this kind of scenario could be explained easily. Maybe there was someone who got the information, but their classmates refused to listen and finally fell into the darkness. It is also not impossible for students from Class A or B to get some information, and they use it wisely so their class doesn't lose too many points in the first month. After all, even if they knew about the point system, it wouldn't help a lot in the special exam. It could give them an early start, but after that, they could only rely on their own ability. Have you ever wondered how much money is required to keep ANHS operating every day? ANHS is a free school where the students don't need to pay anything, and are even paid by the school every month. Even if they are Class D with 0 class points, they are still given the daily necessity to survive. With the size of the facility, it wouldn't be a surprise if they need to spend at least 50 million yen every month, which is a really unthinkable number for a school with only around 400 students. However, if you actually see the quality of an ANHS graduate, I don't think that number is actually worth the result. They might be better than the average high schooler, but only a few students are actually worth the money. Back in Volume 10 second year arc, there was a scene where Harikita's class discussed what they were going to do if they got the Class A privilege, and the conclusion they came to was to use it to secure a job at a top company. Although it's not necessarily bad, that alone shows us that average quality of ANHS graduate is just a mediocre office worker at a top company. There were definitely some exceptions such as Manabu and Nagamo, but those kinds of people will be fine even if they are not studying in ANHS. So spending 1 billion yen to produce an office worker is a question that we should ask instead of wondering how many women Koenji has slept with. It's not like it's impossible for them to someday build a big company or become a prime minister, but it's still sad to think of 1 billion yen wasted to produce 40 office workers every year. With that kind of result, it's actually a miracle ANHS is still operating up to this day, so unless ANHS is actually part of some money laundering scheme, the budget and economy of ANHS itself don't make any sense. Not to mention sometimes they got a luxury trip, a cruise ship, and even the privilege to change their private point for actual money after graduation, which became a clear reminder that this series is just a fiction, and ANHS is just a convenient place to build the story. One thing that always bugs me about Kushida's past story is the fact that she seems to never get any mental health checkup after her middle school incident. Since the incident caused the entire class to stop going to school, it should be enough for a psychiatrist to specifically look after Kushida. If someone could cause the entire class to break, then it's laughable to think they will just let her enter a private school without any surveillance. That incident must have been covered, but letting Kushida roam freely will only repeat what she had done. So unless that school really doesn't care about their students, I don't understand why they just let her out of their sight. It is still a question whether the teachers at ANHS are secretly counseling her or not, but looking at her and changing personality, I guess she just gets away with everything she has done. It's actually funny to think that ANHS might be the only high school that's willing to accept Kushida with her record, and the same thing could be said about Hirata. The way he beat his entire classmates and became a tyrant just to prevent bullying is a terrible record that not even Ryuan will have. So I got a strong feeling that Class D is actually created to shelter all those criminal students and give them a second chance. If that is really the case, maybe the school actually doesn't care about Class D. They accepted the problematic and low IQ students to give a better impression on society, but in reality they are secluded and left to suffer. If they even allow delinquents such as Ryuan and Hosen to roam around the school, that tells a lot about how lightly they took the security of the students. It's true they have security cameras and class point system, but they will only take action if the victim reports the incident. If they are too scared or get intimidated, that means a tyrant like Ryuan and Hosen could terrorize the entire class. It's indeed highly concerning why ANHS shows the students that could cause harm to their students and reputation. But once again, let's not think too much about it, since the story will be boring without their existence. Back in Volume 7 second year arc, Haruka and Akito have a plan to withdraw from school, and that will result in a -600 class points for their class. A 300 class point penalty per student has been introduced ever since Volume 8, but no matter how many times it's mentioned, I still think this penalty is such a ridiculous system that could result in many laughable scenarios. For example, if Class B manages to convince one student from Class A to withdraw from school, they could easily win even without a special exam. They could offer that students a long life contract where they would pay him a certain amount of money each month, and I'm sure there will be a lot of students who will agree to take it. Just imagining your 3 years of hard work vanish just because one person decides to withdraw should enough to tell you how fucked up this system is. Katsuragi is the finest example of this case. He actually had a chance to bring Class A into a disaster if he kept breaking a rule while he was still in his previous class, but he kept his head high and proudly transferred to Ryuen's class. Since the school promotes the students to work as a class, they probably impose a really high penalty that could be caused by an individual, so the class would work together to prevent it. However, it still doesn't change the fact that no matter how hard you study and do well in a special exam, just one heartbroken classmate who is willing to destroy the world could actually burn all your effort to ashes. Sakayanagi and her ego already did it, and it is also worth noted that when Yagami got expelled, his class also lost 300 class points even though they didn't know anything about it. So, let's just pray Ayanokoji will never withdraw from school just to let Horikita graduate as Class A.